Welcome to our presentation about our recent trip to Liberia, Africa. Jessa and I went to Liberia in Western Africa in January of 2023. And so we have several items up here that we'll encourage you to come and look at. Items that we had carved, then special things that we had purchased. We'll share about the Liberia soccer team and then the fabric and everything as we go. So if we can go to our first slide. All right, so our mission trip to Liberia was really a mission trip of love. Next slide. And what the goal was is that we were going to leave the United States and spend 2 weeks, and then it ended up being 3 weeks, while we were in Liberia, Africa. Next. I know there's more slides. There's numerous slides on this presentation. So a little bit, these are the houses that that Baptists had built in Liberia, and these are where the students live. Palm trees. It was 92 degrees the entire time we were there, and then we were invited by the Baptist Theological Seminary in Liberia, in Monrovia, and some pictures of students. And then also a chapel. Is the PowerPoint working?
I'm moving it, but it's not advancing. Let's do this.
Yay! Oh. Okay, very good. So a little bit about Liberia. Liberia is the first and oldest modern republic in Africa. Many people do not know that it was an American colony. And it was the only African colony that the United States had sponsored in that sense. There are more than 20 different ethnic groups, language groups that are in Liberia. And what happened is the American Colonization Society started the nation of Liberia and returning freed men and women and those who were of African descent but born free back to Africa, those who wanted to be repatriated. And so from 1821 until 1847, which is roughly during the time of the Civil War and after the Civil War, more than 18,000 Africans returned back to Africa. And so the Maryland Colonization Society and different groups sponsored by Baptists and Quakers helped people return back. And so it was a several-month voyage on wooden ships back to Africa. In 1848, Liberia declared independence as a nation. The United States recognized it immediately in that year, and they established what was known as the Americano-Liberia nation. And so it was people who were of African descent, Congolese, others who were sold into slavery, most of them from South Central Africa, were returned back to the western coast. At that time, the British were in Sierra Leone, and the French were in Togo, the British were in Ghana, and so there was all of these European colonies around, but this would be specifically an American colony that the United States allowed Africans, recognized the Africans' leadership immediately. From 1848 till 1990, most of the presidents and those who were voted in were of American descent, of African origin. But in 1980, there was a civil war and there was a coup. The military general captured and executed the elected president and took over as a military leadership. There was a civil war from 1980 until 1997 where factions fought each other, and you probably have seen videos on Frontline about that or stories about the civil war in Liberia. Basically, about 60 to 80,000 people died in that civil war. It became part of a division of ethnic groups also fighting one another. In 1997, there was a peace treaty that was agreed upon. It didn't last. And then the Civil War continued from 1999 to 2003. 700,000 persons would be displaced out of Africa. And sadly, what we know about displaced persons and people who are refugees, only about 4% of them ever return home after they leave their country of origin. So 1 million people are leaving Ukraine right now, and we expect only 4% of Ukrainians to return home to Ukraine after the war. So war and refugee displacement is very traumatic upon ethnic groups and societies. Their economy declined 90%. So imagine something worth $1 being only worth 10 cents. And so a lot of things that were destroyed is that when the military came through and the rebels came through, they executed not only the people, but they burned the schools, they destroyed the hospitals, anything that was government sponsored. And while we were there, we would hear stories from students that many times the rebels and warlords would come through and execute anybody who had to do with the previous government that they had overthrown. Now that includes all doctors, nurses, teachers, librarians, garbage men, postal service, anybody who got any type of government payment was thought to be corrupt, and so they executed many of them. And the stories that we heard were that parents would be brought out into their house by the rebels, and parents would be executed in front of their children, and then they would just leave the children. So much of the nation is under the age of 30 and had not been to schools. So the public school system was destroyed in 1980 and really didn't get rebuilt until after the 2003 peace treaty was signed. They elected the first woman to be president of an African nation at that time, and they started to rebuild. 10 years after they began to rebuild, they ran into what was known as the Ebola epidemic. Ebola is a virus that you get that causes hemorrhaging, and so you literally just bleed through your skin and out of all your orifices and eyes. Highly contagious. It's passed from one person to another, including on money. And so they became really concerned about going to the store, and this is the Liberian money, and you'd pay for bread at the bakery, and they would give you money back, and the money would have Ebola on it and spread. And so that was one of the many things that happened. During the Ebola epidemic, more than 250,000 people died, and they just buried them in mass graves. The military came through with trucks and just hauled them to a mass grave. So you're looking at 80,000 people dying in a civil war, 700,000 people leaving the nation, and then having the Ebola epidemic of 250,000.
And we were told during the Ebola epidemic that they would have garbage trucks come through, and you would just put the bodies in those, and they would take them off. And one of the tribal traditions that some of them had is that you would wash the body in water, and then you would wash yourself to get rid of any evil spirits or anything like that. And so whole families would die because of these traditions, and neighbors would just burn the house down around them.
So a lot of fear. After the Ebola epidemic, what did we have in 2020? COVID. And so we all went to the hospitals, or we went to the doctors, or we went to the sports center and got our COVID vaccinations. That didn't happen in Liberia. They didn't have the money to pay for the vaccinations. They don't have the medical infrastructure to actually give vaccinations. And the vaccinations have to be timed. If you remember, you got one shot and then you'd have to come back after so many. That's not part of their system there, being able to keep calendar days. And so they simply had massive numbers of people die from the COVID virus also. So anybody who looks older, if you look like you're in your 70s or 80s, you're highly revered and respected. And so most people thought I was 72 because of my gray hair. And so they would ask me if I was lost, did I need my help getting me back to my house or the guest house, or did they need to carry my books for me and stuff? And I'm 50. I'm just 50. I'm not that old. So this is Liberia. It patterns itself after the United States, including its flag. Next slide. And so it has Congress like we have, a presidential house, and then also a Senate and a Supreme Court. And that was part of what we would visit while we were there. We briefly got to see it. And then you also get to see bullet holes in a lot of things, and things that are still burned. So we were actually invited on October 15th. So I had been praying that the Lord would lead me and allow me to do mission work. And so I prayed, Lord, I would like to teach. And lo and behold, on October 15th, I was invited to become a professor, an adjunct professor of theology in Liberia. And so I had from October 15th until January 8th to raise the money and get everything ready to go, including getting all of our vaccinations. So we had to have yellow fever vaccinations, we had to have adult polio. There were 21 vaccinations that we had to verify that we've had to be able to go. So Reverend Manu Masakoi is the president of the Baptist Seminary in Liberia, and he invited me to teach New Testament theology and English. And part of my own conviction is that I don't do missions alone. Jesus sent people out 2 by 2, and so I prayed that God would send someone with me. I asked some people to go with me, and they said no, and in the process, Jessa did say yes. So Jessa would join me, and she would be working at the library and books, and also organizing and teaching English. So the plan was that we were supposed to be there January 10th through the 29th, but because of our flights in Africa, we actually had to leave on the 8th. So we were told, give us 3 days that you want to travel, and then I'll tell you when you're flying. And so originally our flight was out on January 10th in the morning. A week and a half before our trip, we were told, congratulations, you're leaving at 3 in the morning on the 8th to be able to go. So we did. Next slide. And so Charles Jones would be the one who would lead, to coordinate that with International Ministries. We really had 3 goals in this trip, and the first one was to go and be great guests. Most of the time, people go and do missions from North America, and we tell people what to do and how to do it, because we're experts on everything, right? No, we are not experts at being African. Jessa and I are very white. We're North Europeans. My family is Scandinavians. And so our goal was to go and be great guests, to do whatever they asked us to do within our own conscience, and to do it however they asked us to do it. We are not going to go and complain. So I always invite people to think about, what would you think if you invited someone to your house and they set the schedule, they told you what to cook, they came into your kitchen and told you how to cook it, they told you how to do your laundry, and then they told you how much you are going to spend to keep them entertained. That's oftentimes how we do missions. And I've been on mission trips where that just really bothers me. Such as one of my first mission trips was in the deserts in Mexico. And there was a church in the United States and a mission group who came down to Mexico, brought all the wood, and built this church, this little white church, wood church, out in the middle of the desert. And I asked the Mexicans, I said, why aren't you using that? And they said, we are using it. We're tearing it down and burning it. And I said, no, why aren't you using it for worship? And they said, come with us. And we went inside and we sat inside this little church. Well, there was no air movement and it was so hot I couldn't even be in there anymore. And they said, they invited themselves to come down. They told us that we needed a white church like they have. We knew we were going to tear it down and use it as firewood. And so they brought us a whole bunch of free firewood. And so now we're tearing this church apart and burning it. And we all worship underneath the trees where there's a cool breeze. And I thought, that's what we should do in missions, is we need to ask them, what do you need me to do? And then we'll do it. So we're going to go and be great guests. And part of our being great guests is we ask them, is there anything that you need from the United States? They needed theological books. There's not a way to get quality contemporary books. And so we said that we would bring some. I made the announcement to our churches that I was taking books, and lo and behold, we took over 100 pounds of theological books, and that blue suitcase there is just full of books. And when we arrived in Liberia, the customs guard said, oh, open this up. We've never seen someone bring a suitcase full of books before. And so they all gathered around to look at that. The second goal was that we were there to listen and learn. I was not going to go teach North American, European theology to people in Africa. I was going to go and teach them what are the tools that we use to do theology, and how could they use those tools to do African theology. And so that would be very important. And then we were there to learn, to listen from them. The third thing is to share and to serve. We were going to go and do whatever we were asked to do. Next slide. And so here that picture is of Jessa in the library. So January 8th we would travel, and we intentionally decided not to fly Brussels Air. We are not flying a European airline. We decided to go African. And so Ethiopian Airlines is the #1 trusted airline in Africa. And so we would fly from Kansas City to Newark, and then Newark, New Jersey to Togo, Lomé, Togo, which is a French-speaking territory and a French-speaking airport. We would get on a different plane and fly to Ghana, and then fly from Ghana to Liberia. And it took us about 30 hours to be able to get there. Sadly, before we left, Jessa was already sick, and I did not know that. And she was not feeling well.
I threw up in the Newark airport before our 10-hour flight.
Yes.
It was
so,
not great.
So I was nursing her on all of these flights. And flying African Air was quite interesting because in the United States, when you get ready to get on an airplane, your ticket has your zone, and you wait, and you all get on in an orderly fashion. That's not the way it is in an African airport. They announce it's time to board, and everybody who's on that flight stands up with all their luggage and goes to the door. And then they stuff you into this bus with all your luggage. You are literally in there like sardines, and then they take you out to the plane, and everybody gets off, and then you get on the plane. And then you negotiate where you're going to sit. You have an assigned seat, but if you can negotiate a better one, you do that. So that was our experience, and it was just pure chaos, but it really introduced us to Africa, the way things are done in Africa. Leave all of your North American cultural ideas and superiority here and to fly there. And so our first several days we were there is to get cultural acquisition. We wanted to figure out who we were serving with and how they wanted us to serve. And I knew going that it's very important to greet people in their traditional way. So I watched some YouTubes on how men do the Liberian handshake. And the Liberian handshake is this, then this, then this, then this, and you snap at the end. So it's 4 movements, and the end always ends with a snap. Now, men do that handshake to men. You don't do it to women, and women normally don't do that handshake to each other. So it's a man handshake. So the first thing I did that morning is we got in about midnight. We slept, and at 6 in the morning, we were up, and I said, what are we doing today? We're getting out of the house, and we are going to go introduce ourselves, and we're going to go to chapel, and we're going to join this community as soon as possible. Which really surprised them because they all said, the first thing white North Americans do is they come here and they hide out. And they spend about a week in their house trying to figure out if they can trust people. And we didn't. We got out right away. So they said that you were very different. So immediately I went up and greeted people with the men with the Liberian handshakes. And they're like, wait a minute. You know the secret Liberian handshake? Are you sure you're not an African soul caught in a white man's body? No, I just watch YouTube. And so that's what we did. We went to chapel, and we really walked the campus and introduced ourselves to everyone, which they thought was just crazy. Because they said there are 3 things that we know about people in North America. And what are those 3 things? North Americans are rich, North Americans are fat, and North Americans are bossy. Those are the 3 things that they know about North Americans. Rich, fat, bossy people. So as good guests, we were going to go and not be rich and bossy. Of course we went as fat because we're just fat. And they told us that. And so in Liberia, you can walk up to someone and say, you're fat, and it's not considered an insult. And so I said after 3 weeks, I lost about 10 pounds, and our cultural guide said, good, you needed to. Okay.
I showed a picture of Macy and I because they asked about what Macy looked like, and Francis said, oh, she's fat too. Yep, okay.
Yeah, she's fat too. So we were there to learn about their culture and to really do whatever they needed us to do. So if they wanted me to pick up trash, I would pick trash. I told them, you have my time and attention, and so just ask me to do whatever you want. For 2 weeks, we did teaching and serving, which we will get to. I would preach a variety of times. First, I would preach in chapel, and then they would be totally amazed that a white person could preach. And so then they asked me if I would preach in other places. I did, and then it became an argument among the clergy of which church I was going to go to. Well, I'm really glad that Charles Jones said, the president will set your schedule, and you'll go to him every day, and you will do whatever he says. So if he says you're going to go to this church and preach, that's what you do. So anybody who came up to me and said, we want you to preach at our church, I would say, you have to talk to President Massaquoi. He is in charge of my schedule. I'm his servant, and I will do whatever he says. And then we flew Ethiopian Air home and had some of the most delicious food from Africa. And so we really enjoyed our time. Next slide. And so we would arrive. We would leave, and it would be 23 degrees here in Kansas City and arrive at 92 degrees in Togo. So in Africa, you can see it's based upon a lot of the American system. And so there's about 90% of the nation absolutely loves Americans. And we were some of the only white people we saw for the first week among 1 million Africans, which was just a different experience. And it really made me begin to appreciate what African Americans and minorities experience here of being in a crowd of white people and not seeing someone like you. We went to the First Baptist Church, and it's actually Providence Baptist Church, which was started. So a lot of Baptists are in Liberia. And we would do a variety of things. One of our favorite places that we would stop was the bakery. They had delicious cinnamon rolls. But they don't use a lot of sugar, so we became professional at taking 2 sugar cubes and rubbing them together to top our cinnamon rolls with extra sugar. And then we would also stop for gas. And as we were driving around, I kept seeing these wood tables, and they had these big jars on them. And I thought, wow, this nation must drink a lot of tea because it's just large jars of tea. No, they were gasoline. They are large jars of gasoline. And you pull along the side of the road and you tell the gas boy how much you want, and then he takes those jars and on the side of the road and he dumps it into your tank like they're doing right there. You don't go to a fill-up station, you just buy gas along the side of the road. Yeah. And then this is the tailor. We stopped and saw the tailor, and I have clothes up here. And we asked how much for a shirt or a dress. Shirts were $5, dresses were $10 and included the fabric and all the sewing. No electricity, so they did all of it by hand or by pedal machine. Yeah, and so we would watch them. This is the road system in Liberia. It's mostly dirt roads, and they are in the process of building paved roads. So you're driving along the main road, and then they're repairing it, and in the United States, they would have you drive on the other side of the road, but they don't do that in Liberia. They have you drive in the ditch. And so you go down in the ditch and you drive in the dirt ditch for a while or in the field, and then you come back up on the road. And that happens about every quarter mile. There's no public services. So there's one hospital, there's 2 ambulances and a capital of over 1 million people. There's no postal system. There is a very poorly run postal system, and I'll get to that. But there's no trash service. So no public water. And so you throw your trash outside, and when it piles up, you just set it on fire. And so the ditches oftentimes are full of trash, alleyways are, and they're burning. So a couple of the trash piles became landmarks for me. I knew that we were getting close to where we had been before because I could see the trash burning. This is the road system, and it is a 2-lane highway, and you have cars going both directions. But in between the cars going both directions, you also have motorcycles going both directions. And you have motorcycles on the outside, and then you also have people walking. I would never drive in Liberia. I'm glad that we had a driver. His name was Basile, and he was just excellent. And then traffic jams would happen, and you get a flat tire, and you just stop on the road and fix your tire as people swerve around you and honk. But this is the capital of Liberia, Monrovia. And during the Civil War and after the Civil War, millions of people came to the capital. And there's no public system for housing, and so a lot of it was just shanties. Whatever you could find, you used that to build your house. So it wasn't stealing to take somebody else's things that they had laying in their yard because they weren't using them anymore and you needed them. So I learned that people weren't stealing. They just, if I left a rake in my yard, I didn't need it anymore. And so somebody who needed it would pick it up and go use it. And if I needed it, I would go find it, or I would just take a rake that's not being used by somebody else. So it's not, the concept of stealing is not there. You willingly gave it up when you laid it down. Yeah, so next slide. So this is the road system, and the KKs are these little taxis, 3-wheel taxis that you could get in. And then we were in a car, and then the road system. And then they also have these motorcycles, and these motorcycles are taxis too. You just get on the back of the motorcycle and you go around. We were told that we could not ride the motorcycles. About a third of the people who ride motorcycles die each year. And so no helmets, no traffic lights, no safety. All right. So we had a driver, and then we ran into these traffic jams all the time. And what is that man doing out there? Well, if you pay that man, he'll stop the other cars so that you can go faster. And so you just, whatever it is, paid in a bribe.
So we were also told at the beginning that we probably would not get to ride in KKs. And then on the first Saturday, Francis and I went to go get our nails done together. We got in the dean's car and we drove out past the gate. As we were getting ready to turn onto the road, the car stalled. It was I don't remember what it's called, stick shift. And it just stalled and stopped working. And she goes, well, we need to go and get our nails done, so we should hurry. And I said, okay. And she goes, follow me. And she grabbed a KK, and we hopped in and we went. I had no way of telling Dad why I was in a KK, or I was having an amazing time, or any of that. But one thing about the KKs is they don't have to stay on the road as much as cars. So when there was a traffic jam, we would just go into the ditch and just go around it. And that was very exciting and very different. And then we got to one of the junctions and we hopped out. And those men also get paid by the taxi drivers to load their cars. So they'll yell and holler that they have 2 seats and have people come get in them. And then the taxi driver will pay them some money for quickly filling up their taxi. And so we took that and went and got our nails done. And then we came back and Francis stopped at the gate and I was going to ride the KK back to the house. So I rode it back to the house, and some of them are not used to driving on sand because that's what the seminary has. And so more than once I heard her yell or scream at them to slow down and be careful because they were trying to go quickly on sand. But it dropped me off, I paid him, I said goodbye, and then I was like, Dad, where are you? You need to hear about my amazing day. You have no idea I did this, because he watched me drive away in a car and I came back in a KK. So I ran and found him and told him all about it. It was really fun.
This last picture on the bottom right is we were on our way back from church. On our way to church, we were stopped by the police, and we had to pay a bribe to be able to go on the road. So the police were very corrupt, the ones that I ran into. But this is on the way back from preaching, and we got in this traffic jam, and it was a 3-hour traffic jam because there was a soccer game going on. They were having the county competitions, and Lufa, which is one of the teams, was competing against Nimba, which is another team, a soccer team. And so, lo and behold, we got in a traffic jam. And what happened is there was 3 lanes traffic going towards the soccer, and there was supposed to be 3 lanes going away. Well, when the 3 lanes going towards the soccer filled up, the people in those lanes just poured over into the other one. So it became 6 lanes going towards the soccer game, and the rest of us had to drive in the sidewalks or in people's yards to get around and get out. So it was a 3-hour traffic jam, and Jessica got proposed to more than once through the car window.
I also got yelled at and asked what team I supported, and I said, I don't know what you're talking about. And Basile explained what was happening. But they get very into their soccer games. We saw multiple people who were painted head to toe in green paint, wearing the different jerseys. They had noisemakers, and we're just having a great time. Yeah. And
when I say traffic jam, it was car rubbing up against car,
like scraping
and scraping. So you would just scrape the other cars as you go by, or people would walk over the cars once in a while selling water. So it was quite interesting. Yeah. Next slide. So I was there to teach New Testament theology in English, and Jessa was there to do library work and to teach English. And those were our 2 main things of why we went. So next slide. So what we did is we discovered that this was a very wonderful community. We went to worship. That's President Massaquoi. Worship was very spirited, a lot of singing. They would sing and dance and bring the offering forward, and they were very responsive. It was one of the only times I've ever gotten a standing ovation for a sermon that I preached, which was quite interesting. This is the water tower that was outside our guest house, and this is where we had water. If the water tower, the black tub on the top of the water tower had water in it, we had water. If not, there was no water for that day because the well would run dry, or there was no electricity to pump the water into the well. And it was water that we could not drink. So we would get the water, and then we'd have to filter it, then boil it, and then let it cool off to be able to bathe with it. Water that we drank with is what we got from the store. from one of the markets. They spent an hour every day in prayer, and we really enjoyed their prayer life. And then they had some of the most caring people. These are the 4 land workers that I ran into. He would cut the grass, the one with a stocking cap on, would cut the grass with a bent machete. No lawnmower, just cut the grass with a bent machete, and they would rake it up. And these ladies were just incredible. One of the things that we agreed to is that we would wash our own clothes. That we were servants, and so we were not going to have servants while we were there. So I would wash the clothes and hang them out, and then the ladies from the kitchen and the ladies who helped keep the grounds would come over and laugh, and they had never seen a white man wash clothes before. And then I was out one morning mopping the floor on my hands and knees, and they all came over because they had never seen a white man, mostly men, ever wash the floor. So they were always over at the house wondering what those crazy Americans were doing.
And they would always tell Francis, our housekeeper and one of our guides, your people are doing something strange again. Your people are doing something
Your people
weird.
are strange. Your people are doing something strange again. This is one of the many students who were there. She's cleaning fish. And then there was great temptations. There was these signs that read, "Do not walk on the grass. Fine is US $20. And I couldn't figure out why you couldn't walk on the grass. Well, if you make cattle paths on the grass during the rainy season, and it rains every day for 6 months, those really become rivers and troughs. And so they tried. So I did not walk on the grass, although I was tempted to do cartwheels on the grass and pay the $20. I didn't. And then this was the scene from our back porch. We were right on a lagoon that then attached to the beach. But there was bramble bush that you couldn't between us and the beach. So we never went to the beach. And the reason why is because bad people were on the beach a lot of times who would mug you or steal your stuff or even kidnap you. And they couldn't get through the bush. And the bush was full of snakes too. So we went to the beach, but we went to a localized beach. And then this is the sunset from our back porch too, through the palm trees. It's just an absolutely wonderful experience. Not a lot of electricity, so not a lot of air conditioning. And so it was hot, 92 degrees and about 90% humidity. So next slide. Go ahead and play this. This is Daniel. Daniel is a missionary. He carries cases of Bibles into the bush and distributes the Word of God on foot. And so that's one of the many things. And so he talked to me about being a missionary. And then we keep in contact with Daniel about his ministry and what he does. He was one of the students who would also go to the hospital for malnutrition. And I'll get to that in a little bit. But a wonderful campus. I asked them why they paint the trees, and they said because it makes them look nice. Okay, if that's what you think makes them look nice, then we'll paint the trees. But that was one, that's the chapel there that I would preach in. So had an excellent time with the students, very friendly and caring students. Next slide. The people that we met, one is Frances at the top right. Frances was our housekeeper. She's also the head of the business office. And we would ask her questions, and she cooked for us. And so we asked her if she could please make sure that African food is incredibly spicy. And I said, I have a really weak stomach, so you could use a little spice. It was still too much for me. I told Jessa, the time the spoon comes to my lips were already blistering before I ate it. So I asked for no spice, and that was just enough spice for this white guy. We were sitting in lunch one day, and all of a sudden we heard this thud, thud, thud. And we went out, and Peter, who was in this gray tank top, was climbing the coconut trees and kicking the coconuts down. And they were gathering the coconuts. The ones that weren't good enough to sell, they were drinking. And then they were putting the others in a wheelbarrow, which they would take out and sell. And that money would pay for the director of agriculture. And he's the one with the backpack. He has the gray shirt on. That's Levi. Levi's parents were executed in front of him during by rebels. And his mom was a teacher, and his dad was an agricultural extension worker. They both were executed because they worked for the government. And he wants to be an agricultural director. So he asked me if Jessa had ever had a fresh coconut, and I said no. So he was directing them to use their machetes to carve a coconut for Jessa. Be careful, this is for her. And they really treated us like kings and queens. And then he came over and gave it to Jessa, and I said to her, "You're now married." So, so that was one of our experiences. The middle picture there is Boakai. Bolkiah was our daytime bodyguard, and he was just incredibly nice. And they called him
Big man.
Big Man.
Yep.
Most people couldn't figure out his name, and his name is Bolkiah. And then the security guards also made charcoal on campus. So I was one of those persons who would put on my hat and my bird watching glasses and take my walking stick, and I would walk around and try to figure out what everybody was doing. And they said, "You are the busiest North American we've ever met. You're always going somewhere." So I went over and watched them make charcoal from the trees that had fallen down in a recent storm. And then this is his dad. After they make the charcoal, they sell it. And so they get about $150 a month from their charcoal making. And that's the average salary. This is one of the ladies who would clean up. That is a rake she uses to rake the grass and the weeds. And I was taking pictures, and she said, "Take a picture of me, take a picture of me." They speak English, and I'm very good at that. And then this is one of the other professor who was there. He is African-American from Virginia. Next slide. And these were my students. This was my students. I was asked when I got there if I would be willing to teach theology, and I said yes. And they said, "You'll probably have 10 to 15 students." And I said, "Great." And when I got there, they said, "How many are you willing to teach?" And I said, "I'm willing to teach as many as you can get in the room. I'm here. I've traveled thousands of miles to be able to come and teach. So however many you want to, that's fine." So as soon as I announced that, they tore out a wall in the building and expanded it, and I ended up having 32 students. 32 students. And they were pastors and other people from all over Liberia who came, both men and women, for my class. And so this is the smart classroom. It is the only classroom that had Wi-Fi and electricity. And they get electricity from 3 places. The national current, and the national current is sold by Liberia, but it is not consistent. So some days they don't have electricity, some days they only have half the power or current, and you can just watch your lights dim, 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 and then just go off. And so that's the national current. So they do have solar panel energy, and my time there we used a lot of the solar panel, but it's not strong enough to actually run everything. So they have a generator, and we think, oh great, a generator, right? Well, you can only run the generator when the truck is not using the battery. So they only had one battery, and so when they were driving the truck, they couldn't run the generator, so they'd have to take the battery out of the truck to put it in the generator to run the generator. But gas is $19 a gallon. Yeah, so you don't run the generator very often or very long because it's too expensive. So when I was in the building teaching, and I used PowerPoint, and the PowerPoint would go off, and electricity would go off, and the air conditioning would go off, I said to them, "What do you Liberians do when you have no electricity?" They said, "We go out and sit under trees." Well, then let's go sit under trees. And so that's what we would do. Anytime the electricity was off, we would go outside and sit under the trees and have lesson. And then the power would come back on, and we'd all run back inside and turn back on my PowerPoint. We'd continue to teach until the electricity went off again. So I would teach from 3 o'clock until 6 every day. 3-hour lectures, and then interaction. So it was an excellent time. Really got to know the students and really helped them understand theology. The traditional way of teaching in Liberia is through write and repeat. I tell you, and you repeat it back to me, and I tell you it again, and you repeat it back to me, and we keep doing that until you have it memorized. And I told them I wasn't going to teach them that way. I was going to teach them how to think, not what to think. And that was totally new to them. And so at first it was a big struggle because they would say, "Well, what do you think?" And I would say, "Who cares what an old white man says? The question is, what does the Bible say, and what is the Bible saying to you as Liberians?" And so we really developed a Liberian theology. So next page. Mm-hmm.
You said you had the students then from 3 to 6, so what did they do with the rest of their day?
They had 2 other classes that they were taking. So sometimes they were in class for 3 hours in the morning, 3 hours in the afternoon, and 3 hours at night. And so, and then a couple of the other teachers, like one of them would just yell at them, and they'd repeat it. So 3 hours of just repeating what other people said. So they said my class was really refreshing to be able to sit and think.
And his class was from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m., and the library closes at 4. So for about 2 hours, I would just go and talk to students and get to know them and spend time with them while he did his class. And then at 6, that's when everyone would leave campus, and we'd go back to the house and have tea. They don't have dinner there. They have breakfast and lunch, and then you have tea and maybe some sort of bread. We would always have the like
Cinnamon rolls
sugar
or
twist things, donuts, and we'd have a donut and then go to bed.
Yeah. And when the electricity goes out and it's nighttime, what do?
You go to sleep.
You go to bed. And when the sun comes up, you get up.
Yep.
Yeah. So one of the things I had to do was just take off my watch and stop worrying about it. Yeah. I had the great opportunity to preach, so I preached in chapel 2 times. And then I also preached at Howell Baptist Church, which is the president's church, which is a great honor to preach there. And these are the church mothers. And so I was talking about how thousands of people died in the Civil War, and Ebola, and COVID. And these are the last 2 mothers over 70 left in that church. Everybody else is about 30 and younger. And so these were the honored mothers in the church. And the lady in the middle is the president's wife. The other Sunday, I was invited to go to First Baptist Church of New Crewtown. Now, Crew is a tribal group, so this is New Crewtown. And I preached there, and while I was preaching there, Jessa wanted to go see the children's ministry.
I did. So I had talked to Jared. His dad is right there. He had been talking to me during one of Dad's classes, and we had just been hanging out, waiting for the class to get done, because he ran all of the IT stuff. And so it was his job to wait till all the classes were over and then go turn everything off. So we had been talking about children's ministry and how I want to be a teacher, and so he invited me to come and see the children's church in his church. And I went, and I was handed a baby, and I was told that I was in charge because I knew children's songs. And instead of having them memorize scripture, I taught them songs, and I ended up not getting to hear Dad preach because I was there the whole service. But I got to meet over 30 children and just play with them and sing songs and give them all suckers. So that was really fun.
And there are so many children and many of them die before they reach adulthood because of diseases. I really talked to the church about that we should respect children not because they're going to survive and become adults in the future, is that we should respect and honor children because Jesus loved children as children. Not what they're going to later do for us or be for us, but that they're children. And so in my conversation with them, they decided to double the space that they were doing their children's ministry in. And so this is a later picture that they sent to me of a space that they are remodeling for their children's ministry because of the conversation that they had with Jessa and the work that she was doing with children there. And so you can see it's brick with a concrete overlay, and then there it's wood rafters and metal roofs, but there's always space between the rafters and the walls, and there's no glass for those windows. So bugs come in and out at will. So, and then all of the desks are chairs and stuff that they've made from scrap wood that they found in the ditches. So, next slide. And so while we were there, we discovered that there was 2 other things that we were supposed to be doing. Next slide. Jessa was doing work in the library, and what did she discover? It is hot and humid.
Very hot. It was about 105 degrees at one point and 90% humidity, and when I get super hot, I throw up, so that's not good. But whenever the electricity was working, they would bring me a fan, and I would have to sit for about 10 minutes in front of that fan, and then I could do 5 minutes of work because I would just get so overheated, I'd have to sit down. And because of the humidity and how close the books were on the shelves, they had a real problem with mold and bugs. They had a lot of books that had been eaten through by different termites and bugs like that. So we worked on going through. You can see one of the women who was in charge of cleaning. So we would wash the books, let them dry, reorganize them, and put them on the shelf slightly more spread out. Also, the system that they had wasn't really a system. They had one system, they had a missionary come and do some work for a couple of months and change it, but that didn't stick because she didn't teach them how to do it. She just did it herself and then left. And then they didn't have any sort of organization for about 7 years. They showed me a little chest of drawers with note cards. Well, some of those had been destroyed by water, burned during the Civil War, or were just stolen. So they had no actual log of what books they had. They also had a large, like, graphic novel fictional section because people donate books to their library. They need theology books, but they get sent things like Little Women and The Hunger Games and stuff like that. They don't really need those for their studies. But a lot of it was going, okay, this is the theology section. Why is there a mini theology section over here, and why is there more in the back? Let's put it all together. So it was a lot of just reorganizing and just really cleaning all the books to try to get rid of the bugs.
And the roof leaked, so
Yes.
whenever it rained, the books would get wet. And so they were always having to do with damaged books and keeping these books straight.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I also we got through about 2 shelves, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it was a lot of books. You
Well,
can see how tall
2
the
shelves,
shelves are.
front and back,
Yeah, 2
ceiling to
rows,
floor.
front and back. And we got through that, and then I left detailed instructions, so Basile, who's the librarian there, knows how to keep it going and keep making progress, and I've been talking to him, and they've made quite a bit of progress, just reorganizing. And it also helps the students because their old librarian would say, oh, you need that book? Well, go look in that section. It's not alphabetized or anything. It should just be on that shelf somewhere. And so they would spend hours just looking for one book, and then they possibly didn't have it. So a lot more efficient. And we also, we had a few people that were writing down all the names of the books and what books they have so that they could keep a record.
And that was part of what we did at first, is to simply ask them how they were going to do their books. They said, how do you keep your books in North America? And I said, well, in a variety of ways. You can do Dewey Decimal, Library of Congress. Remember, Thomas Jefferson arranged all of his books by color and then by size. And I said, so you can do whatever you want. And they said, oh, do it that way. And I said, no, you don't have electricity. You don't have someone who's trained in library science. You don't have a computer that you can trust. So let's figure out a system that works for you here in Liberia. Mm-hmm. And so we agreed on subject matter, which was printed on the back of the book, and then alphabetical according to the author's last name, first name, and then title of the book. Yeah. So that they would have one system that they could keep without electricity and without anybody trained to do library science.
And if it looks strange, like I'm standing like this, that is because I'm sweating, and this is apparently how I stand when I'm sweating. That's what I do.
And when we first got there, I went out on the first day, and by 10 o'clock, my clothes were just drenched with sweat. So I went and changed, and I came back out, and by noon I was drenched with sweat, and I thought, I can't keep changing every 2 hours. And then I went and looked, and everybody was drenched with sweat. They had sweat rings around them. I thought, who cares about that? We're just going to be sweaty the entire time.
Everyone just has sweat dripping down their face. It's hot. We just got to get over it and keep going. And
then about 2 o'clock, all of them are laying under a tree or sitting in the shade. And I thought, well, what do? I go lay under the tree and sit in the shade. I become just like they did. They were really smart, know when to work when it's not hot. Next slide. So one of the things that happened is they discovered that I was vice president of international ministries, and so they asked me if I would please come visit a project sponsored by the 1 Grid Hour Sharing. Now every June, which is coming up, American Baptists collect what is known as the 1 Grid Hour Sharing offering, and that is our disaster relief and development offering for refugees. And so we have a project. So I contacted the chair of our committee and the director of World Relief and said, are there any project sites in Liberia that I can visit while I'm there? Yes, at Antioch Baptist Church, which just happens to be the American Baptist Women of the Central Region special project for this year. Next slide. So we went to, you can play the video, we went to this school, and American Baptist had built the first ground floor through a grant program, and then the second floor this last year of this school. And it is a school, and remember all the schools were destroyed. This school is being built in this neighborhood for these children. So we would go in and they would all stand and greet us and say,
hello visitor, thank you for coming to our class.
Yes, hello visitor, thank you for coming to our class. And so we are raising $40,000 to be able to build an additional floor for high school, because currently it is only preschool through 10th grade, and they want us to do 11th and 12th grade. You can play the video again. Oh yes, thanks, here. So this is us going in, and I would introduce Jessa as a scholar, as an American Baptist Women's Scholar and a Dean Scholar at her school, because a lot of the students thought the best that they could do is grow up and be a teacher or grow up and be a mom, and we were really challenging them to grow up and be doctors or nurses or anything that you can possibly think of. So we need $30,000 to be able to add and expand this school, and then because there are children who would like to come, and these were the two boys who were outside at the well wanting to come in and go to school, but they don't have the money to pay for it, and the school is full. They literally can't put any more children in there. And during the rainy season, they were all in grass huts, and so the mice and the bugs and the snakes would come in. And so this actually this tile floor will be really ideal for that project. And then the top picture there, that is the first grade class, and the teacher in the middle, and they were all saying hello to Rexanne, who teaches first grade here. So when I got home, I started a pen pal relationship between Lowman Hill Baptist Church, which is predominantly African American and Hispanic, with the students at the school. They write letters, scan them, email them to Liberia. Mr. Samuel Gamade prints them off, shares them with the students, and they write back. So there's an electronic pen pal program that is going on between students here and students in Liberia. Next slide. We did have a couple fun days. We had Saturdays off, and so we did go to the beach, but you really can't swim in the ocean because the current is so strong and the pollution level is so high. Remember, there's no public sewage, and so all raw sewage goes into the ocean. We rode a KK down to this market, and that is an entire city street of people selling things right next to each other. And so there were hundreds and thousands of people there. And to get your attention, they kiss at you. You want some shoes? That was the weirdest thing at first, people kissing at my ear, asking me if I wanted to buy something. We had fufu one day for lunch. Well, I ate somebody's fufu for lunch. And then we also went to the skilled market. And this is, the man there is carving with his pick and his chisel. He has one eye. He lost one of his eyes during the war. And he is the one who carved these items for us, specifically this nativity set and these elephants. And then we also took Frances and her sons, and we went to the beach one day and really had an enjoyable time. So it costs $5 to go to the beach, to be able to be on this private beach area.
You get a wristband for $5 to be on the beach and use the beach area, and then you pay another $5 to use their pool. And so we went swimming with the two little boys, Light and Frank, right there. And then you could pay $10, and they would bring you a giant plate with French fries and chicken. It was like chicken wings. And so you got this huge plate of food for $10, and that's what we all had for dinner, was chicken and French fries, and it was delicious.
Yeah. And it wasn't spicy.
Nope,
Yeah.
It wasn't spicy at all. Also, the fufu, she had gotten that for her lunch and had offered for both of us to try it. Dad thought it was an appetizer, so on his 6th bite, I was like, "Are you done?" And he was like, "What do you mean?" And I said, "That's her lunch." And he goes, "Oh, I thought it was for the table." So she didn't really care. She was like, "Okay, if you enjoy it that much." I enjoyed the fufu. But it was in like a peanut sauce. It tasted kind of like a peanut butter sauce. It was really delicious.
Next slide. It's one of those cultural acquisitions things I didn't get. What we discovered is that while we were there, we realized that there was a food shortage. And they didn't tell us that. So next slide. So we got to discover the pig and poultry project. So our first day is they brought us a big bowl of oatmeal, and that was our breakfast. And then they brought us a bowl of fried plantains, a bowl of cooked rice, and this what they called fish soup. But it was fish, and then you dug under that, and there was crab, and under that was chicken legs, and under that was black beans. And so it was this really, really spicy, delicious soup, but you put it on the rice. So I took a bowl of rice and put a tablespoon of that into my rice, and that was plenty of spice for the whole meal. There's no refrigeration. So the next morning, I was getting ready to take this food out, and I thought I will just take it over to the bush and throw it into the bush. And one of the groundskeepers came over to me and asked me, what are you doing with that food? And I said, well, there's no refrigeration. We had to leave it out last night, so I'm throwing it into the bush. And she said, if you throw it onto the ground, I'll eat it. And I said, what? And she said, if you just throw it on the ground, I'll eat it. We're not allowed to ask you for anything because you are our guest, and that would be rude. But we can eat anything that we find on the ground. So if you'll just dump this food on the ground, we'll come over and eat it. And I said, absolutely not. You can just have it. And 5 people came over and ate that food. And that's when we began to ask questions about why is there only breakfast and lunch? Why isn't there supper served anymore? And why is only 1 meal a day served in the cafeteria? And why are there students who are going to the hospital for malnutrition? And then they told us that there was a food shortage. And they were bringing us the best of the food and were really feeding us, even if some of the people on campus had to go without food. So we continued to ask for food, and they would bring us fresh pineapple and stuff, and then every day we would make our plates smaller than what we normally do here in the United States, and then we would make several other plates, and then we would feed people. So at the end of 2 weeks, they asked us not to leave because they were able to eat, if we could just stay. So people would call us and say, hey, are you out of bananas? And do you need fruit? And I would always say, yes, we need bananas, we need oranges, we need stuff. And then I would just take it right out the back door and feed students and feed people. So
we had people specifically from the ABW project who would bring us just giant bags of cucumber and apples and just say, you must need more, you must need more. And then we would use that to feed the students, or we would take the bag of cucumbers, because he's allergic. I would take one, and then we would take the rest of them to the cafeteria, and they'd be able to have fruits and vegetables with their meals. A lot of the time they had rice and then beans, and sometimes they would have meat, but it was very rare. So one of the days we did have the opportunity to pay for everyone to have meat on our last night there. They all had meat at lunch.
We had fish lunch.
Yep. And
the students ran from chapel to the cafeteria so that they could get fish. Play the slide. So one of the things that they did is I was out bird watching, and all of a sudden I saw them gathering over by the kitchen, and they were butchering a hog. They were taking a machete and they were just whacking this hog to pieces. And they were horrified when I walked up and said, what are you guys doing? And they said, oh, we're butchering a hog. And I said, I grew up on a farm. I know all about butchering hogs. Let me watch. Well, we always skin the hog, and they don't. They eat the skin and everything because they're so desperate for food. This was the day that they got fish. So I went over and asked them if they could please show me their pigs that they had been given 8 pigs, and they had bred them to 32. This was one of the hogs that was large enough to butcher. The rest of them are small. So next slide. And so most of them are still small. And so I began to, my last week, talk to them about sustainable agricultural practices. What could they do to be able to raise their own food, grow their own food, and to be able to sell the food? So I had known about a project called the Global Poultry Initiative, and it's a project out of West Virginia that teaches people in Africa how to raise chickens from Africa. Most chickens in the world are genetically manufactured and bred here in the United States, and large corporations own those breeds, and you can't breed them and sell them without a certificate. They're licensed. But we needed to find out a way to raise chickens in Africa that are accustomed to the heat and humidity of Africa, that are not bound by North American corporations. And so it's this Global Poultry Initiative that they take chickens and then they train people to breed them and raise them. And so I was able to get the head, Levi, the head of the agricultural department, in contact and connection with the Global Initiative, and they are clearing an area and now going to have 500 chickens on campus. And students are going to be paid to collect the eggs, and they'll sell the eggs to pay the students and their tuition. They're going to use the eggs for meal preparation, and then also the chickens. And then we also talked to them about growing cassava, which is what they use to make the fufu. And so we really talked to them about doing more agricultural work. And so I asked them how much would it cost to start the agricultural project of chickens. $3,000. And by the time I got home, I had $3,000 worth of commitments to be given towards that project. So for $8,000, they would be able to expand that and expand their poultry, piggery, and their cassava plant to be able to become self-sustaining campus for feeding the students. So the students have to have food to be able to have the energy to go to class and to study. So that's one of the projects that we're doing is sustainable agricultural and livestock. And I get pictures every once in a while from Levi about the progress of the buildings and the work that's going on. Next slide. And then we came home. And so 3 weeks was just really transformative for us, and I think hopefully for the Liberians. And our goals were still to be a good, great guest. And we did really what they wanted. One of the things that happened to us in Togo is we got to the Lomé airport, and when we got there, the security guards in French asked us to please step out of line. We had to get out of line, and we had to walk back and forth in this area 4 times and then get back in the end of the line. And when I asked them why, they said, this is how you North Americans treat black people. We're going to treat you this way. And we said, okay, that was fine. If you need to do that to have whatever is inside you affirmed. But we experienced some persecution, some racism, but I think through our training we really helped deal with that. And then just strange things that would happen, like the electricity would go out, but they would still put our luggage, the x-ray machine, and just push it through when there was no electricity, and we'd have to go through the metal detector with no electricity, so very strange things. Then we would listen and learn. I listened for the 1 week, all I did was listen to students tell me about their experience during the Ebola and during the Civil War, carrying people on their backs who were dying, and then just burying them. And then we did share. This shirt is I asked my class the Monday after we got stuck in that 3-hour soccer game. I said to my class, "Why did we get stuck in a 3-hour traffic jam about soccer? What's so important about soccer?" Well, it's a soccer nation. So they just went up in an uproar. 32 students telling me why soccer was important. Then I said, well, from North America, which team should I cheer for? Well, they all wanted me to cheer for Nimba or for Lufa, whatever. And then I said, well, I want to get David a soccer jersey. Can anybody tell me what's the best soccer team to get a soccer jersey? One of my students brought this, and this is the Liberian national soccer jersey from the African Cup. And so he gave this to me. So it's very important. Clothes are what people give each other as a sign of friendship. And so when we were getting ready to leave, we were given a lot of clothes. But this is one of David's soccer shirts that I brought home for him. The reason why is when I went to Costa Rica, I brought him a soccer shirt for Costa Rica. He wore it so much that he wore the lettering and everything right off it. And the kids at school just called him Red Shirt because he always wore his red soccer shirt. And so that was our time in Liberia. I would love to go back. We've been invited to go back to teach and to work, and we will just wait for the will of the Lord. Any questions?
I got to hand it to you for being able to deal with all those shortcomings. When I heard that there was another trip going, I quickly thought, but I can't do heat. I can't do heat, I like my niceties.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that's a lot of the spoiled American in me type thing.
Yeah, it's not about comfort. This trip was not about comfort. It's about sacrifice and making sure the good spread the gospel.
Well, and
Yeah.
That's the thing, glorify God, spread the gospel.
While we were there, one of the things I constantly heard about was they're complaining about Lebanese businessmen who had come into Liberia to set up shops. And they set up these bodegas, right? Yeah. And so little shops. And they were constantly complaining. And so I did some research on the Lebanese and moving into Liberia. And so for one of my sermons, I preached about there are 5 Liberian tribes that have tribal groups that still need to hear the gospel. And so Liberians need to do missions within Liberia. But I said, does anybody know the 6th largest unreached group in Liberia? It's the Lebanese. And I don't see any churches that are geared towards evangelizing the Lebanese. said, you really need to stop seeing immigrants and refugees as people who are invading your country. We need to start seeing them as God moving people into our lives to hear the Gospels. God, we can't go there, but they're coming to us. Liberians cannot go to Lebanon because of economic reasons. They can't get flights, but also many Liberians are not allowed to leave Liberia because they are afraid that they won't come back. It's part of that whole 100,000 people exodus. And so I talked to them about changing their attitude and views about people on their borders and immigration, and to really see these Lebanese men as mission opportunities. Go to the same little store, buy your water from the same guy, build your relationship, get to know his family, and then present the gospel. You could use your money and your shopping as a way of evangelizing someone. Then they can take their Lebanese passport and take the gospel back to Lebanon. And so that was the sermon I got a standing ovation for. Well, since then, Lebanon, the Baptist Association of Lebanon, is getting ready in September, early October, to celebrate 25 years of a seminary and Lebanese Baptists who speak Arabic. It's the only seminary for Arab-speaking persons to come and learn how to preach the gospel to other Arab-speaking people. They're getting ready to have their 25th year, their anniversary. So I said, why don't the Lebanese Baptists invite the president of Liberia to come and be part of that celebration? Is there some way that we can actually get these two seminaries connected so that the Liberians can learn about the Lebanese, and the Lebanese can come teach the Liberians how to evangelize these hundreds of thousands of businessmen in their nation? So I made a phone call, and that is now happening. So there may be a joint meeting between the Lebanese Baptists and the Liberian Baptists, and forming an official mission partnership between the two nations. And so I've been asked if I would fly to Lebanon in September to be part of that final covenant. So I said, if someone will pay for my ticket, I'll go. So a lot of things just happen because we just ask questions. Yes?
What's your favorite? Ask Jessa a little bit. What was the food that you missed, your American food that you missed when you were in Africa in Liberia? And what was your Liberian food that you would love to have here in America?
American food that I missed in Liberia.
I said spaghetti.
I would say Chick-fil-A. Chick-fil-A, that's what I missed. Their chicken was absolutely delicious, but it was so spicy. What do I miss from Liberia? Well, their cinnamon rolls and much of their bakery products. I miss being able to go out into the yard and pick a pineapple and eat it there. And I miss the monkeys. So we were told that there were these velvet monkeys, and if you were a good person, you might see them once while you're here. If you're really a godly person, you might see them twice. They came every day for 3 weeks. Every day I would see them. I'd see them in the morning. And then one morning I didn't see them, and I thought, oh my goodness, where did the monkeys go? And so I thought, I'm not going to worry about it. I'll just see them sometime this day. This is gospel truth. That evening at 3 o'clock, I'm teaching my class, and all of a sudden the monkeys come to the window. Yeah, so I got to see the monkeys every day. So they would say, you are a truly godly man because the monkeys came to see you every day. And they thought I was 70, so they were constantly trying to help me do things. I would go out bird watching, and so I'd be out bird watching in the bush, and they'd come up and say, are you lost? Do you need help getting back to the guest house? No, I'm not 70. I'm not senile. I'm out here bird watching. Why are you watching the birds? Are you getting ready to eat them? No. I said, there are over 600 different types of birds in this area. What? And so, of course, I pulled from my backpack my bird book of West African birds that I had bought. They had never seen it before. And so they started looking through it. And one of the beautiful birds that I miss is the kingfisher. But it was like this light blue, and it has kind of a opaque part to it. And it's just beautiful, translucent. And it would just fly by, and it's a kingfisher. And I'm like, oh, that's a kingfisher. And they're like, no, that's the bluebird. No, bluebird is a different bird. That's a kingfisher. We just call it a bluebird because it's blue. Well, look it up right here. It's kingfisher. And then we'd also watch the cattle egrets. And so in the evenings, our security guards would come over and say, hey, you got that bird book? What birds did you see today? And so I would show them the cattle egrets and different things, the fish eagles that would come through. And he had lived there all of his life, and he was like, I know all these birds. I don't know the real names. I just call them the big birds that catch the fish. It's a fish eagle. So I left the book. I left my book. I did. I left it in the library. Anybody can check it out. And I said, I'll donate this book to the library under one condition. When I come back, I get to use it. And so when I get back to Liberia. So I told people Liberia really felt to me like a second home. I would move there if God called me to do it and serve the people.
Mm-hmm. So. Also, going along the lines of him bird watching, there was one morning, he was standing in the kitchen, and I have a picture of him with his binoculars up. He's looking outside, and he goes, oh my gosh, come look at this red-headed bird. It's the most beautiful red-headed bird I've ever seen. And I said, okay. And so I put the binoculars up, and I said, Dad, that's a brown-headed lizard. And it was a brown-headed lizard.
And when it climbed the water tower, I was like, oh yeah, it is a lizard. So, my. Because there was no electricity, no television, and the Wi-Fi was only on a couple hours a day, we would walk constantly. So I lost 10 pounds while we were there. So
yeah, I lost about 15 to 20.
Yeah. Staying hydrated, staying safe, making sure everybody was safe was important to us.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right. Well, thank you for coming.
I'm going to turn this off.
Yeah, standing ovation! Woohoo!